Alrighty, welcome. Let's go ahead and hop in. Let's take a look at some charts to end the day. So I just want to hop in here to TradingView and make sure that I'm sharing my screen here so that you guys can all see this. I'm going to add this to the stage and we'll be able to get started. I think that there's a couple of assets that I want to start off with today. So, Hype has put in a really big move, surging 55% over the last just 3 sessions. Now, this could be on the back of some news with Kraken, some partnership with Kraken, or maybe that's just, a coincidence in time and it doesn't actually there's no causal relationship. Not quite sure, but either way, it reminds me of a move that happened in XRP and SUI, just recently. And XRP and SUI both sold off after the big pump. So just take a look at how similar this move in XRP looks to this move that we're seeing today and yesterday and the day before in Hype. So here's XRP, big move. For what reason? Was there some, who knows why? Doesn't really matter why. It was a plus 30% move over a similar period of time, but XRP gave it all back. And what about SUI? Similar thing here with SUI. And these XRP and SUI both pumped at the same time, and they've both given it all back and look poised to give back even more. So here's SUI. That was a almost 50% pump in just a couple of days. So if you look at SUI and you look at XRP and then you look at Hype, this Hype move reminds me of the SUI and XRP moves. And so it would not surprise me if I go ahead and grab this brush if Hype does this and just gives it all back, all the way down back to $20 or something. That would not surprise me in the least. So where is resistance above? It comes in at 38. So if this move continues, you should expect 38 to be some type of resistance. That's where we've got the 200-day moving average. So get above that, and all of a sudden you can start talking about the all-time highs again. But this has been a big move over a very short period of time in Hype. Now, let's go ahead and take a look here at BTC. And looking at BTC, I want you to ask yourself this question. What is Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin a risk-on asset? Is it some indicator of economic conditions or liquidity? Is it a meme coin with no use case? Is it digital gold? Is it really a store of value? What is Bitcoin? Because as I watch gold and silver and other metals and the S&P, the Nasdaq, let's just take a look at gold and silver. As I see gold just rip higher every single day, seemingly without end, and I see silver over here doing the same thing, going parabolic. I see other metals like copper and aluminum having big moves to the upside. I see even, if we take a look at crude oil starting to perk up, the S&P near all-time highs, the Nasdaq very close to fresh all-time highs, and yet good old Bitcoin languishing down near its lows for this move off the highs, where the move so far from peak to trough has been 36%, and Bitcoin is up off the lows just barely. But if we zoom in a little bit here, this is a daily. Take a look at this pattern. I mean, this is not exactly encouraging. This looks to me like we've got a pull and a flag and a breakdown. And so that tells me, hey, we move lower. So what gives? Why is it that Bitcoin, the ultimate risk on asset, is not rallying right now, despite the Fed engaging in not QE, and the S&P and the Nasdaq at all-time highs, the Russell ripping higher, the dollar dumping, gold and silver going parabolic, even crude oil rallying, every other metal rallying, and what's going on here? Why is it that Bitcoin is just putting in these flag patterns? Like we're just seeing on multiple time frames, we're just seeing the same flag play out, and it's a bear flag. So this tells me that, hey, we got another rejection here in BTC. This level of support, when it really broke, then the retest, it held as resistance. So it looks like unless over the next couple of sessions we can get above, the highs of the day yesterday or today, which came in at like 9,600, it looks like that could be an important level of resistance. So, what does the future hold for BTC and what even is Bitcoin? Because it's not trading like a risk on asset, it's not trading like a risk off asset, it's not rallying with equities. It seems to be trading more in lockstep with like maybe the bond market or something like some type of currency. I'm not quite sure exactly what Bitcoin is here. And I think it's probably just one of the most speculative plays out there. Now, the thing that Bitcoin has going for it is true censorship resistance and decentralization. That is the Bitcoin value proposition, I think, is true censorship resistance. No one can tell you where or when or how or with whom you can spend your Bitcoin. And they can't steal it from you either if you hold your own private keys. So, that is really a great value prop. But is Bitcoin without problems? No, no, it is not. So, just zooming out here to a weekly chart, this 200-week moving average, I think this is an important level to watch over the coming months in BTC. Because here's one thing that I think is true, even though I don't believe it. That Bitcoin halving cycle, the number of days from peak to trough, and then the halving cycle itself, that for some reason has been prescient. The number of days from peak to trough and trough to peak, that has been very, very similar across each of these four Bitcoin halving cycles. So what that tells us about where we are currently is that we've entered a bear cycle, we've entered a bear market with the break of the 50-week moving average and close below. This is just a big bear flag pattern completing. And so we've entered a bear market in BTC, and the bear market in BTC should end. Let me just go ahead and grab this vertical line tool. It should end by October of this year. So right about right there. And so what that means for me is I expect BTC to check in with its 200-week moving average over the next several months. So that's an additional 30% to the downside, 35% to the downside, maybe a little bit less than that. And so that would actually mark one of the, shallowest Bitcoin bear markets in history, if not the shallowest, which I think makes sense given we never saw like a real blow off top to the upside in BTC this cycle. So, I continue to remain short and I expect more downside all the way down to maybe 60K, something like that, low 60s over the next couple of months. And by October, I think the trough should be in. So I'll definitely be buying if we get into like, BTC with a 60 handle, at like 69, 68. I'll buy on the way down around here where I think there's better support. Even this 75K level of support, I don't know that holds. And, Bitcoin's not rallying with anything else. So if this level of support does not hold, then I think the 200 week ends up holding. And I would be very, very happy to pick up some BTC down at the 200 week. But I can't buy it up here at 89K because I think that this bear flag is going to complete. And I think that when that bear flag completes, pattern completion comes in down here at 60. So I'll be a buyer in the 60s, but not before. Now, if we take a look at ETH, let me just go ahead and remove these drawn objects real quick so we have a more of a clean pattern. For me, Ethereum is just bouncing after putting in a big red candle last week. I think it's just bouncing up to resistance. And ETH, if it gets rejected, just like Bitcoin seems to be getting rejected, I think ETH probably continues its bear flag pattern, and we see ETH move down to, I don't know, 2,000, maybe 2,100, right around right there. I think that makes sense, but ETH could overshoot to the downside, and you could absolutely see some type of a retest of like 18, 1,700, something like that. So I remain short ETH. And on GMX, at least I'm earning funding right now, which is pretty nice. So if we take a look over here at Solana, the thing about Solana is that it's more volatile than both Bitcoin and Ethereum. So any move to the downside or the upside is just going to happen faster. Greater magnitude, percentage gains and losses as the volatility increases in these digital assets. So what I see here is the 200-week moving average, the likely next level of support if this channel breaks to the downside. And if we zoom into a daily, sure, you could see some more upside out of Sol, but it looks as though it could already be rolling over here. And the next test of 117, that test will be the third test. So the more times a level of resistance or support gets tested, the more likely it becomes that it breaks. So I think that this probably breaks in the next test. And so down below 117, where does Solana go? Well, the next stop is going to be 96. And if we just zoom out from a daily here to a weekly, let's take a look. So 96 is right here, and the 200 week comes in above 96. So if we get down to 96, that would mean a break of the 200 week. And then you get into what I like to refer to here on Sol as no man's land, NML, because there's no support down here. Maybe you got something small here, maybe something here, but not really. You really don't have major support if 96 breaks until you get to 30. And that actually makes sense to me. Like a bear market trough on Sol of $30. I mean, look, I hope it doesn't get down there, but that would actually make sense because it's just more volatile than Bitcoin and ETH. So if Bitcoin sells off to 62, then I think ETH would be, with a one handle, like, 1800 or something. And Solana, probably $50, maybe 40 or $30 if it really like dumps. And so I think that's an amazing opportunity on the short side. So let's take a look at some other short plays. I really think that Sui looks like this thing could really, really dump hard here. So let's take a look. This break of trendline support, that was the crash on October 10th, where essentially Sui got sold quite violently. Now it looks like we're going to test the Binance crash lows on Sui, and those Binance crash lows come in right around 50 cents or so. Now, if we zoom in on SUI a little bit here, let's see what we got. Okay, so I want to go ahead and throw in some support like so. And hey, if this breaks, we're going down to 50 cents. So $1.40 right now for SUI and no support below. So that's 60% to the downside, and that could happen quickly. This looks like a great short play. I think I'll enter a position on this real small, but yeah, if it breaks, I'll definitely add. Take a look at XRP, something similar. So this pattern on XRP, this is Binance data. This is probably the only support until you get down to 60 cents. So let's see here. I'm going to throw down a horizontal support like so, and I want to just highlight the two levels of support. Let me grab my arrow tool. So the first level of support is right there, that $1.75. That's the first level. If that breaks, and I expect that to break, then I think the next level is right there, $1.25. So the trade, in my opinion, is to play XRP down to $1.25. That's a 33% move. And if $1.25 fails, which I think it probably will, then we get down here to 60 cents. So really getting short up here with, just like no leverage, like you don't even need to use much leverage at all. And then just waiting. Part of the difficulty here is these things are so volatile that they move so much, over the course of a week or a month that, it can be difficult to sit in a position if it moves against you if you're using a lot of leverage. So I would just enter a short here, use no leverage, and wait, because it looks as though Bitcoin really is in a bear cycle. And that means that these, more volatile altcoins should be dumping harder. And so I think there's no support until you get really down to 60 cents. I mean, yeah, do we pause at $1.75 and $1.25? Probably. But I don't think that they hold though. And I think you get down to 60 cents and, maybe down at 60 cents, you can reassess whether there's actually a future for Ripple and what they're building with XRP. And it looks like they've built enough infrastructure where they're going to be able to launch some type of real product. I think maybe like the stable coin becomes their real product. I don't know how they compete, but maybe they're able to. So, but that doesn't mean anything for the XRP token though. See, that's the thing. Like their stable coin is mostly on Ethereum. And so what is launching a stable actually mean for the XRP token? I don't think it means much of anything. And so this, speculative fervor just reminds me of this speculative fervor. And I bet that, you probably see XRP down to 60 cents and probably much lower than that too. Let's take a look at something like Link or AVAX. So here's Link. And this, although Chainlink, the protocol, is very useful, Chainlink, the token, does not seem to have the buy pressure, the demand to buy it. And how is it that it's got still like a multi-billion-dollar market cap? So, this is a breakdown right here. And it looks like the next level for Link, and this is an interesting play too, because it's already broken. The next level of support for Link is $8, so looks like Link could have quite a bit more downside ahead, something like 31% on the downside. I could definitely see that in Link. Let's see here. What other tokens? AVAX. So AVAX, if it is unable to hold 1120, then it moves to 850. And that's just eyeballing this real quick. This is the level of support, and we can zoom in so we can see that even more clearly. There we go. That's level of support right around 1128. So if AVAX is unable to hold 1128, it moves down to 850. That's the Binance crash low. Wow, look at that move. Unbelievable. From $28 to $8 in what? Like it was about an hour. Just in a phenomenally violent move on the 10th of October. My goodness, so many people lost everything. It's such a horrible thing. And that Binance crash, it looked like an attack on their margining system. So, speaking of Binance, here's BNB. So the BNB token, on the crash, it fared better than others. It was able to recover. But if we just, extend this out a little bit, take a look at this channel that has formed now for BNB. So it looks to me as though, if I just make this a little bit more parallel, something like that, it looks to me like if this 200-day moving average holds as resistance for BNB, let me go ahead and zoom in so we can see this more clearly. It looks like this blow off top for BNB, that this was a false breakout right here, the false breakout. So if this was indeed a false breakout, then you would expect this 200-day moving average to hold as resistance and for BNB to get rejected down to support at around 650. But that doesn't mean that BNB dumps as hard as other altcoins, because there's a source of demand from Aster, that Aster DEX that Binance has essentially dumped their perps trading onto. That gives BNB this inflated demand. So I wouldn't expect BNB to dump as hard as like XRP, which I think is like more of a pure meme coin with no real utility. So even something like SUI, which is, I think its value is extremely inflated, compared to the actual utility and like the actual projects that are on the SUI chain. So yeah, this SUI to me looks like a great short. Link looks like a great short. XRP looks like a great short. I take a look at BNB. I'd be more cautious about this one getting short. I'd probably just watch it from the sidelines. Something like Hype. It looks like this move has, run its course. And then if I take a look at ETH, I think ETH has already broken support. I think it probably moves down to 28 and then eventually down to 21. I think Bitcoin has put in its, this bear market rally. I think that was the bear market rally right there. That's all we're going to get. And this is now a solid level of resistance at 9,500. And BTC looks like the next stop is 75. So that's all happening. And, Solana probably goes to 95, but that's all happening as the S&P and the NASDAQ are sitting near all-time highs. So it's just so interesting to see these equities markets just rip and, the metals just literally go vertical as Bitcoin and digital assets just languish. So, as long as retail is just piling into gold and silver, Guess what they're not buying? Bitcoin, ETH, and Sol, or any other digital asset. If you can just open up a Robinhood account or something like that and fund it and trade perps on or trade futures on like gold out from your phone because gold is ripping 4% every day and you use 10x leverage or something, why in the world would you ever trade Bitcoin? Why would you ever buy Bitcoin? There's no volatility in Bitcoin right now, at least not in the right direction. There's no volatility on the upside. Those ETFs have definitely stripped volatility out of the Bitcoin market. So Bitcoin needs the vol to get the pumps. And without the pumps, you don't get the eyeballs. And without the eyeballs, nobody buys it. It's slowly becoming more of an institutionally held asset, which again will strip even more vol. So Bitcoin needs a resurgence. It needs a resurgence of interest, from retail and from people who don't want to be censored with their speech. That's what Bitcoin needs. And as of right now, it seems to be, lacking that interest. So, let's take a look at Bitcoin dominance. This is something that, in previous cycles, there have been big spikes in dominance that have lasted for short periods of time, just a couple of months. And then that marks the top in Bitcoin dominance, which marks the low in the price of Bitcoin, or at least close to that. And then you get the new cycle starts. So, this was actually the start of that blow off top. That was the real alt season last cycle. But we need these altcoins need to have real utility. There needs to be a real use case. And for everything outside of like the smart contract platforms, I think that there is a real use case for some of these tokens. But like even Pendle or ENA or Uni or ETHFi or Eigen or Link or Sui, like these are top tier tokens, top tier protocols, but the cash flows to the tokens and token holders for many of these is dubious at best. So, like, why would you hold the token if there's really no reason to hold it? You're just making a massively speculative bet on the future of a smart contracts platform. In the case of Ethereum, it's probably a good bet because it looks as though Ethereum is attracting all of the institutional TVL, all of the DeFi TVL, all of the best protocols are on Ethereum and its layer twos. All of the institutions are building on Ethereum. Now, institutions are also building some protocols on Solana, but Solana has tokenomics problems. You take a look at Sui, and Sui has centralization problems, where it requires an ungodly sum of money to become a validator here. So it's really not as decentralized as you might think. And maybe that's not a bad thing, but I certainly prefer the decentralization of Ethereum to the centralization of SUI. And this chart just looks horrible to me. This looks like a really great short opportunity out of Sui. Look at how far extended Sui is to the downside, though, from its 200-day moving average. But that doesn't mean that it can't be down an additional 60% from current prices. And this definitely looks like a bearish pattern. I mean, look at that. That looks like a bear market rally. And now that I see this by zooming out, that is an expanding wedge. That is a bearish price action pattern right there, if I've ever seen one. And you also have, if I just grab my brush, you've got this flag, this bear flag, which looks like it's about to confirm and break down. And I think that that sends Sui to the downside. Man, this looks like a great short. Really does. That looks like a great short. That's probably one of my favorite shorts just from taking a look through today's session. Why don't we wrap things up with the handful of items that had earnings after the close? So Microsoft had reported earnings and gapped down by like 7%. Apple reports tomorrow. Tesla reported, and Tesla gapped up by like 2 points, 2%. We take a look at Meta. Meta gapped way up. And so Meta actually has another earnings gap. And it looks like that gap, if there's continuation out of Meta tomorrow morning, that gap at 740, that might be an interesting level of resistance. But we shall see. Alrighty. So I think we can wrap things up with the dollar. The dollar has been dumping. And so that's another reason why, if the dollar is dumping and crypto's not rallying, that's a problem. So that inverse correlation between the dollar and Bitcoin seems to just not be holding here. So the dollar has broken a long-term level of support here. And if I just go ahead and draw this in, we've also got a similar, this type of, maybe not a megaphone, but it doesn't even need to be a megaphone. This is just a level of long-term support that has broke to the downside. And now the dollar is starting to carve out lower lows. So we've got this series now of lower lows on the dollar. So let me just go ahead and highlight this here. We've got this low here. We've got this low here, slightly lower low. And then we've got another slightly lower low. And so let's see what the dollar does. But if it's able to bounce, we would need to see the dollar get back above 97.36 or so and reclaim what is now resistance in order for the dollar to have a shot at getting all the way back up to the 200-day moving average. So this is an important market to watch. And hey, you know what? I think that there's likely further downside ahead for the dollar. So thanks everyone for joining this call live. I do appreciate you guys. It's always a pleasure to be able to chat with everyone. And I will see you guys tomorrow for another live call over here on YouTube, Twitch, X, and Kick. Everyone have a great evening.